So that's in Egypt. Now this one is also another interesting thing because this one is a project in Cambodia. It's a much smaller project because it's a study about women's experience during the Khmer Rouge. As you all know, Khmer Rouge basically ruled in the mid-1970s, and during that time, scores of people actually were killed. So this project documents, it takes a life stories approach, and it examines how armed conflict actually has an impact on women's lives, not just in public. We're not just talking about Khmer Rouge killing women out in public spaces, but also how then it affects women at the home level. But what was interesting about this project was many of these women, prior to being interviewed, had never spoken about their experiences. Yeah, so this is also a note to oneself. If you are going to go specifically to interview someone about their experiences with violence, just bear in mind that it is, number one, a very traumatic experience, as to be expected. So you need to go prepared. But it can also be a liberating one once women are able to express what they've experienced. In this case of this project, many of them were actually willing to also be videotaped. So these interviews are all done on videos, not just through audio recorders. Okay, and another group of women whom we don't often hear from are those who have been involved in feminist movements. So this project is actually conducted by, again, another academic institution in the US. It's called the Voices of Feminism Oral History Project, and it's a Sophia Smith College. And basically, it recognizes that there are all kinds of women who have contributed to fighting for women's rights in the US, but because they also understand that history is biased towards particular voices, that those voices initially were only voices about white women or elite women who have been, in the suffragette movement, for example. So it didn't have voices of black women activists, it didn't have voices of labor women activists, it didn't have voices of a whole range of other women and lesbian women as well. So what this project specifically wanted to do was to bring race, class, and sexual diversity to an existing collection. Okay, so and often oral history is used as a tool, as I said earlier, to complement existing material. Right, Smith College, yes, thank you, Heng Ling. So it's part of the larger project, which involves also looking for personal papers, things that are written by individuals. So women who have been part of the movement may actually write their own journals, for example. It also will complement what organizations have in terms of their records documentation, which is why some of us are anal about keeping things, records, and not throwing things out, because you try and look for materials sometimes and you just don't find any because people don't believe in keeping them. And actually this is one of the dangers also of current way information technology allows us to communicate. We all have personal individual files on our computer, but often we don't necessarily transfer these files to our organizations, right? So what happens if your computer gets destroyed or lost or whatever, and often means that all this valuable information is lost. So we have to actually make a very conscious attempt in today's world to keep information in a systematic way, and this project is also trying to do that. So they haven't actually come up with any outputs apart from the interviews, because the interviews are extremely rich. Actually, I would encourage those of you who are interested in learning about women's movements to go to this site and look at some of the interviews that they've done. And one interview in particular is with one of my most favorite historians called Gerda Lerner. And it's really quite interesting you hear a whole facet of her life that you don't see in her written work, obviously. Yeah, so they expect to produce a video documentary eventually, and so that's another output for them. Yeah. So we actually looked at this site as a way to model what we also want to try and do for our oral history project for Pusat Sejarah Rakyat. So moving on, it's also, oral history has also been used by other social groups, as I've said, and one of these social groups are ex-political detainees in Indonesia. Basically, these are ex-Tapol prisoners, people who have been arrested as a result of the 1965 communist purge in Indonesia. So yeah, and it's essentially just going around collecting oral histories of these people. So they've chosen, this is a cross between an event that happened, the communist uprising, and then zoomed in on a particular group of people to interview in this case. It's also been used by domestic workers, but these are not just domestic workers in general. These are domestic workers in the context of US history. So you're looking at within immigrant workers in the US, you have domestic workers as well. So they're trying to, number one, interview and resuscitate the history of domestic workers, but they're also doing it within the context of immigrant workers in the US. Right? And one of the interesting things about this is that they, whatever products that they have a book project, for example, out of this interviews, the proceeds actually go back to domestic worker organizations. So that's something else that you know can be done in this case.
All right. So indigenous people. So it's, you know, we talked about how oral history can be political. I mean, the act of collecting these stories that have been left out, marginalized, is a political act. And for indigenous peoples, you know, oral history can be a question of their life and death. Not to be dramatic about it, but a lot of indigenous communities are fighting for their land and acknowledgement of their customary land. And oral history is one way that they're able to prove their connection to the land. So actually in Malaysia, in one of the cases, Sagung Tasi versus State of Selangor, they had to fight to be able to use oral history as evidence in court. So the lawyers on the other side tried to argue that it's hearsay because it's not documented. So we tend to privilege a work that has been written, even though if it's written by an armchair anthropologist, you know, from the early 19th century, that is considered to have more authority than someone who actually lived in the community and, you know, experienced and have stories to tell about the particular community. So in a way, the Oral History Project also has another political agenda, is that we're trying to change how people think about knowledge and knowledge production. It doesn't have to be, knowledge doesn't have to be written in a written form. It doesn't have to be written by scholars. It can also be from the voices from the ground. So in this example, it's from the Kuri community in Australia. And what they're doing is collecting stories about indigenous families. And what's interesting, because these stories are very powerful, they even put a cultural warning there. Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islander users are warned that this material may contain images and voices of deceased persons and images of places that could cause sorrow. Because, you know, some of these places they've lost, so it is very traumatic to like listen to these events and, you know, about places that they've lost and the kind of violence that they have incurred onto the community. And so they've archived some of these stories in here, and so and also it builds on their oral history tradition. So there's one part of it which is there's one storyteller. So in their community, they also have these storytellers. So they've also documented stories from him in audio form, in video form too. The next one is the Tibetan elders. So this is an initiative that was actually initiated by the Dalai Lama. He was the one who mooted it because the Tibetan exiles are dispersed all over, in the US, in India, and so forth. They wanted to be able to capture the stories of Tibetans in exile. So they've done 120 interviews and 45 short videos, and they're all available through this website. So it tells about their life in Tibet and how they had to move, and their experiences in exile as well, and their connection still with this homeland, a place that they consider home. So this is both a social group, and also ties into a particular place. So you can see two themes interacting here. This other one is quite interesting. You wouldn't think about people with leprosy as another particular social group, but they share an experience. And so there's this group, and it's an international group. I forgot what the International Leprosy Association. So they initiated this oral history project documenting the experiences of people with leprosy or families with leprosy from many different countries. So Bolivia, Brazil, China, Ethiopia, Fiji, Ghana, India, Japan, Malaysia as well, and many others. And they're continually doing more oral history collection. So this is quite interesting. We wouldn't think about this, and here, we're able to hear some of these experiences of people we would not have even thought about. So. All right. The next one is, I think, very interesting. It's based, so it's event focused. So we talked about how events like Japanese Occupation, May 13th, can be a powerful way to focus, these stories. And the stories you'll be able to hear many different versions or experiences of the particular event using oral history. So this project, the 1947 archives, actually started with this one woman who, have heard stories. Oh, I'm sorry. You all know about the partition? So it happened in 1947 when British India decided that they would, for very complex political reason, divide from where the majority Muslim live and the majority Hindu live. So that's how you got Pakistan, yeah? And now Bangladesh and India. So it was a very violent time. In a very short time frame, 15 million people were displaced. And according to different accounts, between 200 to 500,000 people died during this process of migration and transition. Violence quickly escalated. People who were neighbors were killing each other. Even family members were ripped apart because they were married to a different religious group. So it was a very traumatic experience. So this one woman, I've heard this story. Her grandmother used to tell her the story about her grandmother's experiences, and she always regretted that she didn't document it. She heard the stories as a child, but she really regretted her grandmother passed away and she had not recorded it. So she decided, we really need to record these stories before the people who experienced this are no longer with us. So she initiated this project, and it's a citizens project because anyone can join in and be part of this project, and they tell you how to do it, and they focus on video interviews. So they tell you how to do it. They give you a series of questions, and then they tell you how many hours you need to you'll need to put into it if you're volunteering, and how to upload it. So it's a citizens project. Oh, you know what? We forgot to. Is it there? Is it there? Okay. So we thought we'd show a short clip. So what they've done is also they've edited some of these video interviews into smaller, manageable forms. This is only, I think, 3 minutes, and so with that they are able to make it accessible to more people. So you put it up on YouTube, you put it on Facebook. So the information get dispersed more, and this one is quite heavily edited.
passion was acting, directing plays, and dancing. I'm very happy, and God bless. People love me for that. This culture teaches us how to be tolerant, how to understand. I was 8 years press when the partition took place. Nobody imagined that such a Holocaust will take place. You have prayed with them, you have lived with them, you have eaten together. And the same people coming and burning your houses and killing you and looting you. We had to catch the mail train to take us to India. Then while we going, what we see is heartbreaking. You can see young girls jumping into the well to save the honor. Because people were just catch the young girls and rape them, and the houses are on fire. People are running, killing each other. Even on the railway track, you see dead bodies, hands cut, legs cut. When the train came, there was firing. Who fired? I don't remember, but there was a lot of bullets flying around. And one of the bullets hit me on my left. It's still, there's a mark. But luckily, it scraped through. It didn't damage my bone. There's no first aid kit or bandage to sterilize it. So my grandmother was in tears. She didn't know what to do. She tore off only dhoti she was wearing and how to sterilize it in her own urine. She soaked it and cleaned it and put a bandage. But again, when bad luck comes, some good luck also follows. And the good luck was that there was a Muslim family who was to travel to the border town of India. And he had a reservation and he was in railways. He had a lot of influence. Maybe he was good at heart. Maybe the money did the trick. Whatever it is, he accepted. He got a place in his compartment, the whole lot of us. The whole train was fully packed and every station there was killing. Even people would come to our compartment also. Is there anybody? Is it that the Muslim gentleman, he had his all credentials with him. He says, my family traveling, that's why I have to go up to Kasur. So please let me go. There's nobody else, because we would hide ourselves under the seat, in the bathroom, and then only his Muslim family would be visible. And then when we saw the other compartments, there was nobody survived the whole train. So partition was a curse on the human history. Such kind of hatred should never come in anybody. I hope my future generation and your generation don't see the kind of history that we have got.
Okay, so it's quite a powerful video, and they made many more of these. And one of the things that he pointed out were the violence that occurred, and I think for a long time these stories were not available because you only get the official accounts, which maybe gives the number of people who died or number of people who displaced, but it doesn't tell you the horror, the tragic, just the type of violence that happened during this time. And he also mentioned about women. One of the things that oral history had been able to contribute is that we know more about how women suffered in these in these types of events. Stories about women throwing themselves into wells to save themselves, because there was also a lot of rape violence happening during this time, ethnic cleansing type. So these are also the stories that are very powerful that we can only get through the oral history. The other one we thought we'd share with you also on the partition is an audio archive. And interestingly, it was someone that Beng Hui, you knew the mother, you know the daughter, who was interviewed by this professor, Andrew Whitehead from SOAS. And this is just to give you an example, like that there's the audio that you deposit with PSR can have a life on its own. Even if you don't go out and do a project, do these beautiful videos, it has value on its own, and potentially it could transform into many different forms. So this Professor Whitehead's audio archive, which he deposited at SOAS and made public, He himself has used it for a radio series and also a book. But other people, local Indian scholars, have also used it and have produced several books about the partition several years later. So, your interview could be used, down the line many years later. So, really think, about your contribution really has a lot of meaning beyond what we see today. Okay. Yeah, we decided we would share the audio because it was quite powerful as well, and it shows like how a very clear interview. Just scroll down. Scroll up. So this is the on the left is the person who's being interviewed. She's there with her daughter. Is that your? Oh, that's your. Sorry.
And a very indelicate question. Tell me when you.
1922, 8th of August.
And how did you get involved? Involved in helping.
Can you hear?
I just helped because I used to work as an honorary worker in the Harding Hospital. So all the volunteers that were volunteering at that hospital were asked to go to the old fort and help the women that will be coming in the refugee trains or by trucks. So I was also one of them with the other workers.
So on that first day that you were doing this work, where did you go to?
No, the first day, how these things happened was that the shops started being looted over here. All the Muslim shops were looted by everybody. And they broke open the window panes and just take everything and a tonga and run. And my father was on duty in Bowra, so he phoned that, see, now I will not be able to come. And then Nehru came himself.